we start with the chapter cell. I'm going to start from somewhere in the middle of the chapter from page 59, and I will explain the different parts of the cell. Now here is a diagram of a animal cell, and this animal cell has an outer covering. This outer covering that I'm here tracing out, this outer covering. Every cell has got this outer covering, and this outer covering is called the plasma membrane. It is called the plasma membrane. Now, what is the function of this plasma membrane? Since it's like a covering, it protects the cell from whatever material is outside. Suppose there may be a lot of material outside here, outside the cell. Okay, there would be like a lot of material outside the cell, which should not be entering the cell, because if it enters the cell, it would disturb the reactions taking place in the cell. So the entry of material and the exit of material, and there would be material inside the cell also, which should not leave the cell. So the plasma membrane acts like a guard. It allows the entry and the exit of only selected materials, not all materials, but of selective materials. So one function of the plasma membrane is it allows the entry and exit of selected material. So since it allows the entry and exit of selected material, it is also called selectively permeable membrane. So here we see I've written here it is called selectively permeable because it selects the entry and exit of material, allows only some material to enter and some material to exit. The other function is it separates the contents of the cell from the external environment. So whatever would be, so here we have written here it separates the contents of the cell from the external environment. So two functions: allows the entry and exit of selected material and separates the contents of the cell from the external environment. So remember, the plasma membrane is the outer covering of the cell. Outer covering of the cell. Now in the next, now here we will see how some material enter and leave the cell. Let us take the first example of oxygen. We'll see the movement of oxygen inside and out of the cell. Now oxygen and carbon dioxide, they enter and leave the cell by a process called diffusion. And I think you are already familiar with diffusion. Diffusion is movement of material from high concentration to low concentration. So when material moves from high concentration, it always will move from high concentration to low concentration. This is called diffusion. Let us take the example of oxygen. Now within the cell, there is always a low concentration of oxygen. And why is there a low concentration of oxygen? Because oxygen is constantly being used by the cell. So outside here we'll have a lot of oxygen because it is brought by the blood, by the tissue fluid, and by the blood. So there's a lot high concentration of oxygen outside the cell. So I've written here high concentration of oxygen outside the cell. Oxygen is brought by blood or other tissue fluid and surrounds the cell, right? But however, inside the cell there is low concentration because oxygen is being used up by the cell. It is used up for many processes like respiration. So here see inside I have written low concentration. And why is there low concentration? Because oxygen is used up inside the cell, especially for the process of respiration. The oxygen is used up. So there is a low concentration. Outside there is a high concentration of oxygen. So what do you expect now? That the oxygen is now going to rush into the cell. From a high concentration, it's going to move into an area of low concentration, and that is why oxygen enters into the cell. Oxygen enters the cell. So let's see what happens to carbon dioxide. So remember the process here, it's diffusion, movement of high concentration which is outside the cell to a low concentration which is inside the cell, low concentration of oxygen inside the cell. Now it comes to carbon dioxide. So let us see how carbon dioxide moves outside the cell. Okay. Now again, carbon dioxide will move by the process of diffusion, and we know what is diffusion: movement of a substance from high concentration to low concentration. Fine. Now inside the cell we'll have a large amount of carbon dioxide. And why is there a large amount of carbon dioxide inside the cell? Because inside the cell there are these processes of respiration is taking place. And when respiration is taking place, there is respiration here, there is respiration taking place. And you know, in respiration what is given out? Carbon dioxide given out. So here we have a high concentration of carbon dioxide, a lot of carbon dioxide inside the cell. However, outside the cell there is less carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is not produced outside the cell. So here we have less concentration of carbon dioxide. So now what do you expect? Here there is high concentration and outside there is less concentration. So the carbon dioxide will go from high concentration and come out into the lower concentration. So this carbon dioxide will now leave the cell. Carbon dioxide leaves the cell because it goes from a high concentration which is inside the cell to an area of low concentration that is outside the cell. So the main process by which carbon dioxide and oxygen enter and leave the cell is called diffusion. It's by the process of diffusion.